time now for Second Opinion with host Erwin Knoll, editor of The Progressive. The Progressive is a monthly magazine of investigative reporting, political analysis, and commentary on society and culture, published in Madison.
Welcome to this edition of Second Opinion. My guest today has a voice that's bound to be familiar to most radio listeners in this part of the world. George Vukelich has broadcast regularly over the years on this and other stations here in Madison. His North Country Notebook program can be heard weekly on public radio here. His columns appear in Isthmus. He writes for other publications, too. George, welcome to Second Opinion.
Thank you, Erwin. It's a pleasure to be with you.
More than 20 years ago, at the height of the U.S. involvement in Vietnam, George Vukelich instituted a practice that should have become a Madison tradition, and for a while it did. At Christmas time, he read on the air from a remarkable book called Letters From Stalingrad. And I believe that anyone who heard those programs still remembers them. A year ago, I made a stab at reviving that tradition with George here on this program, and we're going to do that again tonight. But first, George Vukelich, explain why these letters, written by German soldiers who fought a filthy war for a repulsive cause, should constitute such a powerful anti-war testimonial, in fact, such a magnificent human document.
I think, Erwin, these letters have that power because they're written in a truly universal language. They could have been written by any soldiers in any war, any soldiers, that is, who knew they were doomed and were permitted to write one last letter, which was then put upon the last German plane to leave what they called the Stalingrad cauldron or pocket.
Why, how did they know that they were doomed? Were they told by their officers that there would be no escape? Let's set the stage a little bit, because I suspect there are young people listening to us who don't know very much about the siege of Stalingrad.
It all began in the August of 1942, when the mighty German Sixth Army, which had conquered the lowlands, which had driven the British to Dunkirk and beyond into the sea, invaded Russia and approached Stalingrad. It was a dusty summer of the steppe, all that kind of thing. And they were smitten with the sight of their own power. From horizon to horizon, all they saw was German armor, German men, very few Russians. It looked like they were going to remain undefeated.
They hadn't encountered very fierce resistance to that point.
Once in a while it would be, as the Brigadier General retired, now dead, S.L.A. Marshall writes in the preface, in the introduction to the book, once in a while there was a pimple of resistance. Some few Russians who did not flee, but who stood there and fought, and bravely, and were wiped out to the last man. What ensued following that summer was the Russian winter, Hitler's ego, and I think quite properly the valor, the overwhelming bravery of the Russian people who constituted the opposition at Stalingrad. Hitler had assumed or presumed to capture Stalingrad by the winter. He had to divide his forces. His generals told him that he could choose between Stalingrad and Caucasus oil. He decided to split his forces, and that was a fatal, irretrievable error. He didn't have enough manpower to pursue his goal of capturing Stalingrad according to schedule. The Russian winter caught them ill-prepared. They didn't have winter clothing. Their tanks the oil ran viscous and thick as syrup in the Russian cold. And all the advisors, both in Berlin and in the field, advised Hitler to pull back the Sixth Army to a winter line, to straighten it along the River Don, and then sit throughout the winter preparing for a spring offensive. Hitler refused. I think one of the reasons he refused was because Stalingrad was indeed named after his great opponent, Joseph Stalin, who had a will as strong as Hitler's.
It isn't named that anymore, by the way. It's now Volgograd.
Indeed, indeed. So, Hitler made the statement that where the German jackboot is set, where the German soldier sets his jackboot, there the German soldier stays. Reichsmarshal Hermann Goering plays a role, a very significant role in this fiasco. The German army had untenably long supply lines, which were harassed constantly by Russians, both military and civilian. And indeed, there was a corridor guarded by German troops that brought in supplies on the ground. As this supply route became longer and longer and longer, it became more and more vulnerable, particularly with the winter setting in. So Goering assured Hitler that he could indeed supply the German Sixth Army by air. I think the minimum requirements, as spelled out by the German quartermasters, was something in the order of 700 tons of supplies a day. Ammunition, food, medicines, everything else. They never began to reach that. There were fiascos. Planes arrived full of condoms for the Sixth Army, and they had precious little time or occasion to use them. Planes were shot down by the Russians. Indeed, it just sealed the doom. It made the lack of supplies, the winter, the Russian force just made it impossible. The thing that triggered this initially was that while the Germans were asking to be withdrawn to a winter line, Hitler dawdled, no, 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 and the Russians threw up a light ring around the Sixth Army, fully expecting, because the Russian commanders were not stoops, fully expecting that von Paulus, General von Paulus, who commanded the Sixth Army in Stalingrad, would feel the pressure, ask for relief from Berlin, and be given orders to break through that light ring. The Russians fully expected that. When von Paulus did not do that, the Russians, in their amazement, quickly threw another ring around it, and then a third. And once they threw that third ring around the Sixth Army was doomed. It was a question of time. Hitler, later trying to relieve the Sixth Army, sent up a force led by a General von Hoth. Hoth got to within 20 miles of Stalingrad, and von Paulus's troops said he could go no further. He was bogged down and in danger of being entrapped. Hitler said that the German Sixth Army would stay there. Von Paulus appealed, please, let us break through and join up with them. Let us try to fight our way out. Hitler said no. So von Hoth, with his relief army, had to withdraw. And it was just a question of time in the Russian ice.
How many German soldiers were there at Stalingrad?
The German Sixth Army consisted of, the speculation is 270,000 to over 300,000 men. That constituted the German Sixth Army and its support units.
And what happened to them?
They were captured, defeated. Of that number, 270,000 to over 300,000 men, most of them died. They died in the battle. A large number of prisoners were marched off toward Siberia. Years after the war, about 5,000 grizzled, old, lame veterans worked their way back to Germany. 5,000 survivors of that force.